In every photograph of him, he looks exactly like the nightmare we've learned to recognize. Black SS uniform. If you'd been a Jew in that occupied town in 1942 and saw him walking toward you, you wouldn't have stayed to ask questions. What nobody knew, what nobody could afford to even imagine, was that in the damp basement under his own kitchen, a Jewish family was already hiding. And they would stay there for 3 years. Let's call him Carl. Before the war, he was just an ambitious clerk from a small German city. Promotions came. He learned the right phrases, attended the right meetings, and nodded at the right speeches about racial purity. When the war broke out, he was posted to an administrative office in an occupied town in Eastern Europe. The apartment he was assigned came with creaking stairs, thin walls, and neighbors. 1 floor down lived the Rosens, a Jewish family. For a while, the war felt like something happening at a distance. Then, that distance closed. Posters went up. Jewish businesses were seized. Curfews were imposed. The yellow star appeared on sleeves like a spreading disease. Carl watched all this from his window and his desk, reading orders that turned families he knew into problems to be managed. When the first deportation notice for the Rosens building came across his desk, he signed it automatically, then sat staring at the ink drying on the page. That night, long after curfew, there was a knock at his door. It was Mr. Rosen, hat in hand, shaking. He knew what the order meant. He spoke in fragments, the children, his wife, the rumors about where the trains went. What exactly passed between them over that kitchen table, no record says. We only know that by dawn, when SS men swept the building, the Rosen apartment was empty. Neighbors whispered that they must have fled. Nobody thought to question the fact that, from then on, Carl's cellar door was always locked. Hiding a Jewish family was a death sentence. Hiding them as a serving SS man was beyond reckless. It was treason, not just against the regime, but against the very identity Carl had spent years building. His wife was terrified, but she also agreed. They moved sacks of coal, built a false wall, and cleared a space barely big enough for 4 people to lie down. Food went down in buckets when no one was watching. Above their heads, the boots of the SS came and went. Daily life became a balancing act on a knife edge. By day, Carl sat in an office processing lists of Jews to be rounded up, property to be confiscated, and train schedules to be coordinated. He stamped papers and filed reports, hearing colleagues joke about resettlement. By night, he crept down the cellar stairs with bread and potatoes. He listened to the Rosens' children whisper in the dark and tried not to think about the gap between his uniform and his actions. There were close calls. Once, an SS comrade came by unannounced. As they drank in the kitchen, one of the Rosen children coughed below their feet. The sound was faint, but in that silence, it might as well have been thunder. Carl slammed a cupboard door and dropped a pan, cursing loudly. A comrade laughed, called him clumsy, and asked for another drink. The child did not cough again for hours. Another time, during an air raid, the building's residents crowded into the shared cellar. The cellar was now divided, one half for Carl's family, the other for everyone else. In reality, it was a wall separating life from death. As bombs fell, neighbors pressed against the bricks, inches from the Rosens' hidden space. Through a tiny crack, Mrs. Rosen could see the silhouette of a woman she once traded recipes with. She did not call out. On the other side, Carl stood between the two halves of his world and kept his face blank. 3 years like this wear grooves into a man's soul. For the Rosens, it meant cramped limbs, stale air, and constant dread. For Carl, it meant an endless series of small choices. What paperwork to lose, which searches to volunteer for, and which to avoid. He had to become 2 different men to survive. The efficient SS functionary and the secret saboteur of one tiny piece of the final solution. When the front finally collapsed and Allied guns could be heard, the town dissolved into chaos. Carl stayed. When the first foreign soldiers banged on his door, he did something no manual had prepared him for. He took them down into his own cellar and opened the false wall. The scene was unbelievable. Emaciated people blinking in the light, stepping out from behind coal sacks. A man in a black uniform explaining what he had done. The Allied officers didn't celebrate him. They arrested him like every other SS man and marched him away. Later, the Rosens gave their statements, speaking of risks taken and lives saved. But they could not erase the fact that he had still worn the skull and lightning bolts. Stories like Carl's are unsettling. They don't fit simple categories of good and evil. They don't redeem the SS or soften the Holocaust. If anything, they sharpen the horror by showing how much individual choice still remained, even inside a machinery of genocide. The uniform mattered. But so did the footsteps on the stairs at night, and the quiet decision, repeated for 3 years, to keep the cellar door locked from the outside but open, just barely, on the inside. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we see the world.